for those who are outside this space to attend to this afternoon conference where we will talk about solutions for a biodiversity and equitable world. During this afternoon, we will have 4 contributions to give some idea on how can we progress through action. And the participants in this conference will talk about rewilding, about forest and deforestation, about food, about how to manage the planet as a condominium, and I'm quite sure that we will keep on the same track of excellence we had here in the morning. So I will give the stage now to, to Henrique Miguel Pereira from IDIV and CBO, and he will talk about rewilding nature. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a great honor to speak here today in the Gulbenkian Foundation. Gulbenkian Foundation really had a huge role for many decades in supporting science and the arts at a time where the government was not able or not interested in doing that. And it's still a symbol of support for these fields in our society here in Portugal. So I'm very, very proud to be here today. Also wanted to thank the invitation from Miguel Araújo that has been a leading biodiversity scientist for many years, and that has given me the opportunity to speak to you today about rewilding. And I want to start by rephrasing again the problem we heard this morning. And in 2010, the countries, after failing the 2010 target that has been set at the beginning of the millennium, set the Aichi targets for biodiversity. And the Global Biodiverse Outlook 5 that was just published a few weeks ago by the Convention on Biological Diversity states, and this is a huge failure, states that none of the 20 Aichi targets for 2020 have been met. And I'm going to talk particularly about one of the targets that I think we can make much better in the next decade. And that's the target 15. And target 15 basically was about restoring 15% of degraded ecosystems worldwide. And this target in both of these 2 components, as represented here in this figure, was not met by the end of the United Nations Decade on Biodiversity, that is this year. And so now, a new set of targets is being designed. The Convention on Biological Diversity was supposed to be meeting now in China for the COP15 to approve a post-2020 plan, but this has been delayed because of the pandemic to next spring. But we already know there is already a draft document of how these post-2020 targets will look like. And the European Union, under the leadership of Humberto Rosa here, has already published a biodiversity strategy that will help shape this global biodiversity strategy that is very, very ambitious. I must say that I'm very, very pleased with what has been proposed and approved for the European Union biodiversity strategy. And there are 2 aspects of it. There are many aspects. It's a long document that I highly recommend you to read. But there are 2 aspects that I want to talk to you about. One is that it proposes that there will be a legally binding restoration target for the member states of protecting a minimum of 30% of the EU land and sea area, and develop a trans-European nature network that will be the future Natura 2000, Natura 2000 2.0. And even more ambitious, in my opinion, and really this hats off to the Commission for proposing that, is that there will be the aim of 10% of this area to be strictly protected. And to understand how far are we, is that in most countries, we are well below 3% of strict protection. So this is a hugely ambitious target. Later this week, if you pay some attention to the press or if you read Science, a group of colleagues led by Sandra Diaz are publishing a paper exactly on how we can inform the science of these post-2020 targets. So it's coming out in about 2 days. Be ready for it. Now, a couple of colleagues have shown, Inês Martins and Alexandra Marques, in a study published last year, that the impacts of not reaching these targets are substantial. Not only in terms of the extinctions that our land use of human-dominated systems cause, but also, and this is really a nexus issue, the impacts on carbon and on climate change. If we were to restore all the human-dominated ecosystems of the planet, just by restoring those ecosystems, we'll be able to immediately mitigate over half of the carbon emissions from fossil fuels and other sources of emissions that we have. It's substantial. The impact of restoration in terms of avoiding extinctions and mitigating carbon sequestration have high potential. So how do we do this? How do we restore nature and stop degradation? And I wanted to talk to you about a huge opportunity that is happening, that is farmland abandonment. And farmland abandonment has been seen as a problem. There is a social problem with many communities being left behind in the countryside. There has been concerns about the biodiversity loss that happens in farmland abandonment. And I'm going to argue that farmland abandonment in reality is an opportunity for rewilding. Farmland abandonment is happening all over the world, but of all the continents, Europe is where it will have the biggest area. This is the century of farmland abandonment in Europe, where due to gains in efficiency of agriculture and change in lifestyle, an area that is about 4 to 5 times the size of Portugal will be decommissioned from agriculture over the next few decades. And these areas have 2 important factors in common. First, they have low productivity, so the impact in terms of the contribution for the food system is relatively low, and they have low accessibility, so they are kind of isolated from other areas. And a few years ago, Leticia Navarro and I proposed that this was a huge opportunity for rewilding. And rewilding is the management of ecological succession with the goal of restoring natural ecosystem processes and reducing the human control of landscapes. Rewilding recognizes that we cannot completely control nature. Nature is unpredictable, and we have to handle this dynamic nature. And it also emphasizes something we heard this morning, that is the emotional value of nature, the emotional value of wilderness. Since we published this book and our original paper a few years ago, rewilding it really took off in Europe. It has been covered by many media publications, there's organizations, there is the Rewilding Europe Foundation, there is a movement, for instance, in the UK to rewild the gardens and no-mow movement. There is a lot of enthusiasm that goes across scales, from cities that want to rewild their urban parks, to national parks, to the rewilding of the countryside. Now, how do we operationalize this scientifically? A couple of years ago, we brought together a group of experts at IDIV to try to identify the main components of rewilding. What should rewilding be about? And it's about restoring, it's a particular type of restoration that emphasizes three ecological axes that interact all together. One is about trophic complexity. It's about restoring the trophic complexity, the megafauna that has been lost, and the functions of that megafauna. It's about restoring dispersal. It's about connecting ecosystems to defragment ecosystems. It's about enhancing or restoring stochastic disturbances that we have spent last few centuries and last few decades trying to control. And we do all of that aware that there will be societal outcomes, that there will be changes in nature contributions to people and ecosystem services, both in non-material contributions, in regulating and material, and this non-material, these existence values, the emotional value of nature. That's one of the areas where we expect to gain more with rewilding, but also in regulating, for instance, in carbon sequestration. So, what are these three components? Well, trophic complexity. Biodiversity, as we heard today from Ruben's talk, for instance, plays a huge role in a range of ecosystem functions and processes. It helps regulate vegetation, it provides us sanitary services, it provides with seed dispersal, it provides us with control, top-down control of populations. And when we give nature space and we allow stochastic processes to happen, we are also promoting the natural functioning of ecosystems and biodiversity. This is about flooding, having natural flooding regimes, allowing pest outbreaks to take their course, allowing natural fires to take their course. And it's also about restoring connectivity. Our landscapes and riverscapes have been completely fragmented. And one of the big important things is to reconnect these landscapes, remove dams, remove roads, build bridges. How do we assess rewilding progress? Aurora Torres and Nestor Fernandez in my lab a couple of years ago proposed that we could do this by measuring a set of indicators in two main aspects. One is about ecological integrity, how well the ecosystems are doing. And another one is about human forcing, how much control the systems have from humans. And here we have a representation of what happens in these two axes. And in intensified agriculture, for instance, you have very low ecological agriculture and very high human forcing of the ecosystem, while in a pristine area, you are in this green area with very high rewilding score, where we have low human forcing and high ecological integrity. And the goal of restoration is to move systems from these red areas to the green areas, both by reducing human forcing of ecosystems and by increasing ecological integrity. And this can be done at several scales, and it can be done at the scale of a city park, and this is important. I hope that the Deputy Mayor, Sá Fernandes, in a few years, or right now, set up the new targets for 2030 like he did in 2010 for the city of Lisbon. Lisbon had a strategy for 2020 with goals for biodiversity, a very ambitious set of goals. And I hope to see now, for the next decade, goals for rewilding some of our city parks, because this can be done also at the local scale, not only at the global scale, it can be done from the local scale to the global scale. One of the things we did recently with a range of organizations, of environmental organizations, was to develop a rewilding approach for trans-European green infrastructure that can support exactly this goal of a Natura 2000 2.0 from the European Union biodiversity strategy of the Green Deal. And we use these three approaches, these three axes of trophic complexity, dispersal, and stochastic disturbances to identify the areas with higher ecological integrity, here identified as green across Europe. And these are the areas, let's say, that are highest priority for protection. But this is not enough. We need to go beyond that and restore in areas that there is an opportunity to restore and connect these areas. So we also identified how can you connect some of these areas? What are the areas that could allow us to connect, also for climate change, as Miguel mentioned this morning, for allowing species to move, but also to have this green infrastructure that connects the most important sites in terms of ecological integrity across Europe. And just to inform you again how challenging is the 10% target for strict protection. This is a map of how much strict protection there is in each country. In Portugal is less than 1%, very, very far from this 10%, and most Europe is very, very far from this 10%. And we have a huge challenge for this decade in building this new trans-European green infrastructure and moving towards this strict protection target. One of the things we did, again, was looking at the cities. How is access to wilder nature from the cities? And this, I see it as the post-pandemic, top trips in Europe. So we have to wait for a few months to enjoy this. But Slovakia, the capital of Slovakia, comes up here at the top as the wildest city. And I heard that you can see a huge amount of wildlife even in the city parks there. And Lisbon is not doing that bad. It's in the medium of the ranking here. Now, just to conclude here, what are our policy recommendations for nature restoration in the EU? We really have to shift from a static view of conservation that has dominated conservation in Europe for many years, including the Habitats and Birds Directive, to a more dynamic view of nature that promotes ecological processes, ecosystem functions, and ecological succession. We need to work on connectivity of these landscapes. We cannot only work with protected areas. We have to build connectivity and bring nature everywhere in Europe. Half Earth is not enough. I'm a great admirer of E.O. Wilson, but half Earth is not enough. We need a full Earth where we need to restore biodiversity everywhere. And the Common Agricultural Policy is maybe one of the main tools we have, or if not the main, to make things better in Europe. And we need to reform it fundamentally. We need to restore biodiversity-intensive agricultural landscapes with a scheme of agro-environmental schemes for those landscapes. And we need to restore promote large-scale rewilding in marginal areas. And we need to do a lot in aquatic systems that have been improving in many ways, but are highly regulated through dams and channeling, and we need to restore also wild rivers. I wanted to leave you with two notes of positive after all the worrisome news we heard this morning. Restoration is possible and it works. I have my main appointment is in Leipzig at the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research. And 30 years ago, this was a coal mining landscape. It was a disaster. It was a huge environmental disaster. You couldn't breathe the air, it was gray, there was no soil. Today, you have a beautiful landscape that has been restored. All over, this is huge restoration projects with lakes where people enjoy and forests and parks. And I wanted to end with an example from Portugal. 50 years ago, the Peneda Gerês National Park was created. And today, all this megafauna is back and is much more abundant than it was 30 years ago. One of my friends there tells me that his grandmother lived 80 years in the national park and she never saw a single wild boar. Today you cannot spend more than 1 week there without seeing a wild boar. So restoration is possible, nature protection works, we can do much better, and we need to grab this ambitious EU biodiversity strategy and implement it to the full extent possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Henrique Miguel Pereira, for this hopeful speech. It was very useful to better understand what rewilding is and how nature restoration can be a way to follow. So next speaker will be Mario Boccucci from United Nations Red Programme. He will be with us remotely, so I hope the technologies can allow us to see him very quickly, please.
Good afternoon to everyone from Geneva. Sorry for the glitches a few minutes ago. We did try our best. Sorry, I can't be with you there, but I just wanted to make 3 points, having heard a few speakers before me. Now, the first point is on nature-based solution, more broadly, framing the nature-based solution. The second point is on forest, as the most advanced of those nature-based solutions. And the third point is on the way forward, what is ahead of us. And I'm going to provide these points from the perspective that I have gained through my work now as the head of the UN Red Programme Secretariat, the flagship partnership of the UN with FAO, UNDP and UNEP on forest and climate, and also on the basis of the work that I've done in the past 2 years, supporting the process leading to the climate summit of the UN Secretary General last year. So these are reflections based on what I see from the work I do with countries, with various stakeholders at the country and at the global level. Back to the first point, nature-based solution. Really, to me, what's important to highlight is that we are moving from an era, several decades of negotiations, of discussions. We heard it also from Paulo just a few minutes ago. Discussions on nature and nature-based solution, and now we need to move to a decade of massively scaling up those solutions on the ground. And we need to do that because, as we know, nature can deliver on many fronts. Nature can be a major solution, a key solution for climate, for development, for livelihoods, for jobs, and as we have seen for COVID and recovery, socioeconomic recovery. So then the second point I want to make on nature-based solution is that we are no longer in an either-or situation. Either we phase out fossil fuel to end runaway climate change, or we invest in nature-based solution. We are into a point where we need to do both. It's an end. We need all hands on deck. Clearly, nature is not a substitute for solutions and for transitions in other sectors, but without nature, we cannot succeed. Then my second point is specifically on forests. And I'm going to make this on the basis of my experience with the UN RED program. The IPCC report last year, the special report on land use, made it very clear that we are going to be able to meet the 1.5 target without forest. To put some data points into that, if tropical deforestation was a country, it would count as the third largest emitter, just before the European Union, which will come as number 4. Again, to put another number in there, it's 5.6 gigatons of CO2 emission reduction and removal potential. This is what forest can deliver. And if you think about that, it's massive, because that's about 20% of the total emission reduction and removals that will be needed between now and 2030 to maintain the planet on track for 1.5. But forests are more than carbon. They deliver multiple benefits. Protecting, restoring, sustainably managing forests, of course, will deliver on biodiversity. We heard this from many speakers previously. 70 to 80% of terrestrial biodiversity is homed inside forests. But also, more recently, we have seen that forests play a critical role with both prevention of future pandemics as well as socioeconomic recovery. We know that about 70% of new pathogens that are emerging are zoonotic. So they basically jump from wildlife to humans. And of course, protecting forests is the best shield that we have against the emergence of new pathogens. But beyond that, forest conservation, forest management, and forest restoration can play a key role for socioeconomic recovery. Forests can create jobs, can improve livelihoods, and the quality of these jobs or livelihoods is also very important. With the UN RED program, we have been able to accompany more than 65 countries to take steps to meet their Paris Agreement ambitions on forest. And we have seen during the past 10 years tremendous progress. Of course, deforestation remains still a problem. In the past 5 years, as we have seen from recent reports, we're still losing on average 10 million hectares of forest per year. This is down from 16 million hectares of forest in the 90s. So the problem is still there, but we see the solution starting to come up, and we need to continue to work to make sure that they reach scale and speed in the next 10 years. So my final point is really in terms of the next steps. And here really starting from a reflection from the side of the EU. The EU has a tremendous role in terms of what gets done within the European Union member states, but Europe also has an important role to play in providing incentives and support for actions to be taken outside Europe. Overall, what needs to happen in the coming years, and specifically in 2021, that we still see as the super year for nature, we need to make sure that the ambitions on nature and on forests are as high as possible in terms of protecting, in terms of restoring and sustainably managing nature and forest. We need to see a massively scaled up popular mobilization and participation, because nature-based solutions and forest solutions belong to all of us. And thirdly, we need really to see an action agenda rolled out at scale. I think the signals that we got out of the General Assembly 3 weeks ago are very promising. For those, you probably have seen the Leaders' Pledge for Nature that lays out 10 commitments and makes it very clear that the way forward is to turn those words into action. So here also, when it comes to forests from the UN RED program, we have equipped ourselves to continue to provide support to our members, to our partners, to our countries, in terms of really increasing the supply of emission reduction and removal from forests, and while doing that, maximizing the biodiversity and the other socioeconomic benefits. We are going to work with the demand side and the finance side to make sure that that supply is properly incentivized and rewarded. We're going to continue to work with our partners to make sure that the ambitions continues to grow, especially vis-à-vis the nationally determined contribution during the review periods next year. And finally, we're going to continue to work on connecting and learning, because the next 10 years are going to be important that we work together in an unprecedented way and that we learn from each other. So with this, I finish my remarks, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I look forward seeing you on streaming for the second part of this discussion during the panel discussion. Thank you.
So let's keep our program on. And I'd like to call now Francisco Moreira from the University of Lisbon and CBU. And Francisco will talk about the relationship between biodiversity-friendly food production systems. It will be, for sure, a very relevant relationship, because as far as we have heard in many different presentations today, biodiversity and agriculture are a lot to have in common, let's say. So please, Francisco.
Thank you, Rosário. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to attend this interesting event. So I was asked to talk about biodiversity-friendly food production systems. So I thought it would be better to start by the key basics, so that no one will complain that we did not remember this, that yes, we need to feed billion people, and there will be a continued demand for food in the next decades. Of course, that does not necessarily mean that we need to produce more food, but that's another story, which I have no time to address now. So, in any case, let us not forget that biodiversity is the foundation of agriculture. We eat plants, we eat animals, and that in addition, agricultural production is highly dependent on what is called ecosystem services. So we need nature to help us regulate pests and diseases. We need nature for nutrient cycling, for nutrient sequestration, for soil organic matter, water retention, soil fertility, pollination, very important. We have been addressing this topic in the morning. So it is important, and in fact, quite recently, FAO wrote a massive report acknowledging this, a report on the state of the world's biodiversity from the perspective of food and agriculture. Now, if we want to focus now on biodiversity-friendly food production systems, we need to address the relationships between farming systems and biodiversity. And I do use a lot this simple graph showing the relationship between the intensity of agriculture and biodiversity levels. And this graph shows us that in what we call intensive agriculture, we have scarce biodiversity levels. And as the intensity of agriculture declines, biodiversity potential increases. And in fact, it's funny that this graph suggests that a world without agriculture would be poorer than a world with some low-intensity agriculture. So basically what does this mean? The first message is that intensive agriculture is not biodiversity friendly. So we will be in this region of the graph, and I used an example, this list of threats to bird species. And we see that the first threat at the world level is in fact related to agriculture, followed by logging and invasive species, so on and so on. So if we aim biodiversity-friendly food production systems, we are not interested in this, although, and as Enrique just said, we can still work on increasing biodiversity levels under this context. But the previous graphic also shows us that there is a biodiversity-friendly agriculture. And that's what we call in Europe, at least, high nature value farmland. And it is associated to specific agricultural systems that do hold significant values still today for biodiversity. As example, one orchid species, a threatened bird species occurring in south of Portugal, and a very interesting amphibian. All these examples of creatures depending on the maintenance of this low-intensity agriculture that we call high nature value farmland. And there is still plenty of high nature value farmland in Europe. Of course, we might want to use part of it for rewilding, but it's not a straightforward decision. But the key message for now is there is lots of it, particularly in Southern Europe and in mountain regions. So it is something important. And of course, high nature value farmland is more than simply biodiversity. It is a source of food and water. It is quite important for regulation services, for climate regulation, fire and flood. Being in Southern Europe, I have to highlight fire. This beautiful landscape, these agricultural areas also protect the village from incoming wildfires. And that's a very important service for Mediterranean countries. And in addition, and this is an obvious example, cultural services, recreation, tourism, high-quality agricultural products. Of course, you may want to rewild this landscape, but do you, considering the hundreds and thousands of years that took to build it? I think not, and I'm sure you also think the same. So, high nature value farmland is much more than simply biodiversity. Now, there are some problems. There is a bad karma associated with these landscapes. They have low yield per hectare, so they don't produce much. And they have, because of that, they have a low socioeconomic viability. So recently, myself and some colleagues thought, what can we do? What should Europe do to these areas? And we kind of made an analysis of what are the possible scenarios. And so we, again, depicted a very simple graph relating intensity to socioeconomic viability, and this is where we are now, business as usual. And we thought, okay, maybe in some cases we leave those back to nature. it's rewilding. They will no longer be high nature value farmland. Maybe they will become high nature value forests, but they will not be farmland. Other alternative, let's assume, let's intensify. Let's make it more productive. They will lose the biodiversity value, most of it, and they will become production farmlands. But there are other scenarios. Let's keep just a part of those as a kind of museum landscape and forget all the rest. Leave it to rewilding, for example. Or, and that was the focus of this paper, we made some suggestions to try to make these more viable from the socioeconomic perspective. Associated with this, there is this interesting debate on land sharing and land sparing, and which represents a continuum of spatial organization between food production and biodiversity, whether they can be fully combined or totally separated. So some say let's integrate food production and biodiversity conservation, and others say no, let's keep nature to itself and let's strongly intensify and produce in the remaining area. So the logical behind it is that, as I told you before, land sharing, this situation will make low yields, so more farm area will be required to produce the same amount of food. And in contrast, if we split, if we spare, then agricultural technology will make us produce a lot and we save more space for nature. So this is like a opposite view of where keep biodiversity versus where keeping agriculture. And still, another important concept is the one of sustainable intensification, okay, which refers to actions to increase for production from existing farmland, regardless of being more or less intensive, in ways that place far less pressure on the environment. And so this is a growing concept that applies either for low intensity or high intensity farmland, which is also associated with this concept of ecological intensification, which refers to replacing anthropogenic inputs or increasing yields by promoting ecosystem services. And this whole idea is shown in this figure where for a specific region where there is this potential of production, this is the current existing production levels, and there is a yield gap, which means that this could be even higher if it was not limited by different factors. And in this specific example, this production value reached this stage because there is not more pest regulation. So if pest regulation services are increased, either by using chemicals or ecosystem services, if it is increased, we can close the yield gap and increase the value of production. So the idea behind ecological intensification is to promote these services using nature rather than using chemicals. And so nature and ecosystem services can be used to replace part of these regulation potential in green, or can even be increased and closing yield gaps. So there is lots of interesting discussions on the role and how to place agriculture and biodiversity, which we can come back again to in the discussion. So to finish, what does the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 has to say about these topics? Interestingly, they are mentioned in there. So the strategy defines the setting of a nature restoration plan for restoring ecosystems across land and the sea, and agricultural issues are addressed here, and in particular in a specific action point called Bringing Nature Back to Agricultural Land, where the proposed key activities to implement include working closely with farmers to incentivize the transition to fully sustainable practices. And of course, the common agricultural policy is key for this aspect. Okay? Second, reduce by 50% the use of chemical pesticides to protect pollinators and biodiversity. 50%. The big chemical companies are not liking it. In addition, bring back at least 10% of agricultural area under what they call high diversity landscape features. And so it's coming back to agricultural land and increase its biodiversity potential to provide space for animals, plants, pollinators, natural pest regulators. Then a very, very ambitious objective, 25% of agricultural land in the Union to be organically farmed by 2030. Then agroforestry as a key bullet indicator. Let us implement agroforestry systems. And finally, review marketing rules for traditional crop varieties. Lots of important components of biodiversity are also used for food as livestock breeds, etc. So the idea is to protect and promote genetic diversity, which is an important part of biodiversity. And so in 10 minutes, I think these are some key points that I would like to address. So I end up with a photo from Douro Valley, okay? Olives, vineyards, olive oil, wine. So the question is, can we add biodiversity to this landscape? That's a big challenge that we, as Europeans, have ahead, and we have to fight against very strong lobbies which dominate agricultural decisions, at least at the European level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco Moreira, for your challenging presentation. So we hope that this portfolio of different combinations between agriculture and biodiversity will allow us to have a healthy future and a better environment in the future. So it seems that we are not able to reestablish the connection with Mario Boccucci. It means that we have some more time if the next speaker will need it, because I know that the next speaker, Paulo Magalhães, from the Center for Legal and Economic Research and the University of Oporto, is a very enthusiastic speaker, because most of all, he will talk on how to manage the planet from an idea of condominium. And in a way, it might be one of the most important solutions to put action on the policy, and mostly to provide some kind of normative in order to be able to implement many of the strategies that we have been speaking about. So Paulo, please, the next 15, 20 minutes, as much as you need. Please, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Firstly, my knowledge to all the authorities that are present. I will talk about something that usually is not on the mainstream of these discussions, because usually people see the legal framework as something to make injunctions, to make sanctions, and do not understand that before the sanctions and the injunctions, law has the function of organizing relations, human relations, whatever the scale it is. To make sanctions without organizing the relations is not law. It's a list of sanctions, and environmental law is a list of sanctions. It's not law for me. Because environmental law only see the damage, do not see the positive impacts that, for example, the ecosystems make on their system. Because they are not visible for law, they are also not visible for the economy, and we still always on the same place with the same questions without answers for these questions. And this discussion, that is not a theoretical discussion, starts precisely when the question of climate entered in the UN agenda in 1988. The first question that was raised was, what is climate from a legal point of view? And if we are able to divide the airspace for the planes, if we are able to divide the oceans and to say you cannot fish on my waters, climate put a new question on this debate, because we cannot divide the climate. It's not even from an abstract point of view, a legal abstract point of view, we cannot divide the climate. So the first proposal that was made on the UN General Assembly was made by Malta, and in 12th of September of 1988, the proposal was to consider climate, a stable climate, as a common heritage of mankind. If this proposal was accepted, it was the first object of law without borders that we have. It was probably the biggest revolution, conceptual revolution in international law, if this proposal of 1988 was accepted. But at those times, we have no scientific instruments to define what is a stable climate. And of course, the solution was to invent something that's still being our current legal framework of the Paris Agreement and Kyoto Agreement, that is climate change is a common concern of mankind. From a legal point of view, 30 years after, nobody knows very well what is a concern from a legal point of view. Concern is a concern. And heritage is something that exists for the law. This approach makes all the difference of two different worlds. One world with a global common, intangible, but a global common without borders, and a world without a global common without borders. And we are on this framework, on this legal framework of a world that only recognizes the global commons as the leftovers of the territorial divisions of planets. I must say that all the planets have a territory, bigger or smaller than Earth. The only planet that we know that has a system that supports life is planet Earth. And for international law, the system does not exist. And all the discussions that we have talking today about this issue, my question is, we can have all the programs for wildlife restoration, of nature-based solutions, of biodiversity on the cities. The question is, when we start to restore nature, the benefits of this restoration will be spread all over the planet. Because the system is global, we cannot divide it. Who will pay for the benefits that will be shared by everyone? How it's possible that the work, for example, of forests like Amazonia, that produce positive impacts on the system, because they do not exist for the law, because the third system does not exist for the law, these benefits are invisible for society in legal terms, and for so they are also invisible for the economy. And the only way to put this value on the GDP of the countries is to destroy the ecosystem. Because the intangible work of the ecosystems does not exist for the law, and for so does not exist also for the economy. And in these two completely walls of the whole option between the concern and the heritage, the commons are in the common wall, as we still now. The commons are the leftovers of the commons are the territorial leftovers. We have no global common without borders. We live in a system of burden sharing, and there's damaged content. If we have the heritage, we have a common without borders. We have a new object of law, out of intangible, try to represent that system, and we have an object also of global governance that should be, for example, the object of governance of the United Nations. And in Paris Agreement, what you have, because we have a system of a concern, each one promises to make less emissions, but in the end of the game, it will be always a negative-sum game. Because to make positive actions on the system, because the system does not exist, are not recognized and do not enter on the accountancy. For so, it's always a negative-sum system. The resource will always decrease. In the heritage, because the stable climate exists as a common good, exists as a legal object, we must have one accountancy of the negative impacts that are considered as the value loss, but, and this is all the difference, the positive impacts are a value gain in the heritage, in the common heritage. In the heritage approach, the intangible work of the nature could correspond to a wealth creation. This is a problem of defining what is value, what is wealth creation. How it's possible that we consider that this computer has a value for economy, and the work of nature made by Amazon or made by any ecosystem does have no value. And the only way to put a tree in the GDP of a country is to destroy the tree, and the value of the wood is bigger than the value of the work that this tree made on the ecosystem. This problem, before being an economic problem, before being everything, is a legal problem, that without solving this problem, we will be here talking of the same things that we are talking from 30 years from now, from ago, okay? This is a structural problem, and the structural problem only can be solved if we address the structure of the problem. And why we do not have economic mechanisms to pay for negative emissions now? Why? Because the common, the intangible common, that system does not exist for the law, and for so, these benefits, no one pay for the benefits that someone can make to the commons. This is something that we need urgently to restart to discuss. And this is also one basic question for all human activities. All human activities need a proper legal framework to be possible. Because we cannot divide the climate, we cannot divide the system. Only a proper environmental framework for the commons can allow to manage the commons in the successful way. So, without solving this problem, it will be impossible to restore or to build one economy that is capable of restoring a stable climate or a well-functioning Earth system. So, in this scenario, it is possible to build one economy of caring and restoring the Earth system. With this presentation, very summarized, I can almost present everything in my presentation in these previous slides, but I will try to explain more that today we have the tools to do the things. What is missing to do? The things that we have talked today during the morning is there's social engineering to find the solutions. Because we have the technology, now we have the knowledge about ecosystems, now we have the knowledge to define the common good of what is a well-functioning Earth system, and to understand the things. I like very much this slide to explain we are on the Holocene period. And what we are talking about when we talk about stable climate? We're talking about this, the Holocene period, the last 11,000 years. What you see here is the size of the Arctic on the last 100,000 years. And this is when we ask what is our common home. What is the common? Is the planet or is this period of the Holocene? And this question helps us to distinguish what is the territorial approach, how law still seeing the planet to distinguish the planet, the territorial planet, from the system, and the hardware from the software. We can divide the planet, we can divide the seas, the space of the seas, the system that is there, we cannot divide it. It's a common good. And the only way to manage a common good is to address it as a common good. Here you have the composition of the atmosphere with life and without life. The difference between one atmosphere that allows the Holocene period and the one without life. How it's possible that our economy does not see this work that make this planet a place where life could rise. And what we see in this slide, this is a stable pattern of function of the Earth system, is a stable climate. And here you have a pattern of stability that allows to be predictable seasons and the predictable temperatures that allows the human development. Our civilization is based on this intangible good. That is a stable climate. Before the Holocene period, there is no CO2 enough on the atmosphere to make agriculture and to build a civilization. So, our common home is an intangible, well-functioning Earth system. A planet without the biogeophysical conditions that support life on Earth does not serve as our common home. And for so, we need to have a better capacity in law to represent, to explain how this planet works. Sometimes people say that this is too utopic. This is beautiful, but no realistic. Okay, let's accept this. And please tell me why for 30 years we haven't found a solution to decrease emissions, to build a new economy. Because in a planet that is highly connected, the planet that has a common good, that is the Earth system, if we do not accept that we have a common good, it's impossible to manage it as a common good. And we'll talk more about how it's possible to manage a common good, what are the structural conditions that are needed to be possible to manage a common good. And now we have the scientific tools to define what is a stable climate, what is a well-functioning system. Stable climate is a manifestation of a well-functioning Earth system. And with 9 indicators, do not forget that the UNFCCC works only one indicator, the CO2. But now, the Earth system science and the community of science are understanding that we cannot only be CO2, we need biodiversity, we need phosphorus, we need nitrogen, we need ozone. At least we have 9 indicators that define the safe operating space for humankind. This space of security is not a territorial security. It's not a territorial space. It's an intangible space. It's a qualitative space. If we legally recognize the safe operating space as the pattern of stability of the Earth system, as a common heritage of mankind, we can build a new system of governance, a new economy that takes care about their system. And do not forget, in outer space law, we have already intangible natural resources that are objects of law. Some orbits, some frequencies are regulated by the law and are objects of law and are natural goods. What if we have natural intangible objects of law in outer space law, why can we have one intangible natural good, common good, recognized on Earth? This is the question that until now I didn't find answer. And yes, the climate is an intangible and natural resource that spans across and beyond the national territories of states. This is the reason why it was not accepted that stable climate can be considered as a common heritage of mankind. And the other question is, without making this structural step, will be able to address this problem in a different way? The question is, the rule of the game that we have in our economy is only when we destroy the ecosystems, we can put value on the GDP of the countries. We do not recognize the intangible work of nature. For so, the only way to produce value and wealth creation to the economy is to destroy, because the intangible does not exist for the law. And to deal with intangibles, this is nothing new for the law. This is what we have. We have one economy exclusively based on the consumption, infinite growth, one economy that is incapable of producing the vital services that support life. And this is the same discussion that law has more than 200 years ago. When the question of the copyrights emerged after the Gutenberg machine, the discussion between the author, the editor, and the buyer of the book, for example, was the same. Until the moment that one jurist from England said, one thing is the book itself. You can be the owner of the book, but you have a legal separation between the book and the idea became an autonomous legal good. It was when the copyright born. And with this legal solution, we'll build our society. If I buy the book and I buy the idea that is on the book, we do not have this society because no one produced ideas. And this is a legal solution that is not a sanction, it's a legal solution. And we are talking not about sanctions, we are talking about legal solutions. Without this solution, a legal division between the support of the idea and the idea, there is no society of knowledge. And we need to do the same thing on nature. Nature is not only the infrastructure. Nature is also the work. The importance of nature is the work that is made by ecosystems. If you recognize and make a legal division between the work of nature and the trees and the infrastructure, we can build one economy of natural intangibles, as we have also one economy that some countries 50% of this, its GDP is copyright rights, because the copyright are recognized by the law. And there are countries that a high percentage of its GDP is copyright, because it's recognized by the law with a legal solution. And why we cannot have the same solution? Why? You have rights. I said the book. I have a book in my home. The book belongs to me, but the idea still belongs to the author in the other part of the world. And we can have the same thing that in international scheme between who produce the benefits on their system and the ones that use their system. And this is the most basic structural condition for a collective action, as we will see. Our proposal is to use the safe operating space to understand the second principle that is needed to have a collective action. A congruence between the rules for the provision of the common good and the rules for the appropriation of the common good. We need one accountancy between what each country makes positive to the safe operating space and what makes negative for the safe operating space. What we have now, it's only one agreement on the side of on the negative side, saying that each one will try to produce less damage. But we do not change the rule of the game of the economy, because our economy only grows, only is visible on the GDP when we destroy nature, and we are incapable of producing nature because the intangible work of nature is not legally recognized, and because it's not legally recognized, is invisible of the GDP of the countries. My question is, all these scientists that were here today talk about wilderness restoration, nature-based solutions, and so on. My question is, who invests to restore the ecosystems? The benefits will not stay on the country where the investment was made. Who will pay this in a global scale? The benefits will be spread all over the planet, and you can think that you can restore that system without a legal framework that supports this human activity. Do you think that it's possible to restore that system without a legal framework for do it? This is something crazy. And here we have the structural conditions to make possible a collective action. The Earth system, or stable climate, is not only a common good from a legal point of view, because you cannot divide the system, even if in an abstract way, but also from an economic point of view, is a common good because it's exhaustible. A good that is exhaustible is not a free good, it's a common good. And the first step, the work of Elinor Ostrom about how it's possible to manage successfully a common good, he said that first one is to define the common good. Second, reciprocity, congruence between the rules of provision of the common good and the appropriation of the common good. Without this, there is no agreement, there is no possibility of collective action. After, equity and fairness, depending on the reciprocity and prediction of behavior. If the rules are, the more benefits you produce to the common good, the more benefits for you, I can predict your behavior, and I only change my behavior if I'm able to predict the behavior of the others. This is collective action, okay? We cannot expect from any society, any group, a small group here between us, or the humanity in the global scale. A collective action needs this. Without these structural conditions, it's impossible to have a collective action because, as very well Elinor Ostrom explained, no one will be the sucker. This is the expression that she used on the paper, no one will be the sucker. So, only with this information and communication, we start to build confidence, and the confidence starts to emerge. Confidence will not emerge because we talk about confidence. Confidence can emerge if you can create the conditions to the confidence to emerge. And the first step is to define the common good. Without this, sorry, we will not achieve. We still do not accept that this planet is not only a territory, and we do not accept that we have a global common without borders, and that the global commons of this planet are not only the leftovers of the territorial division of states. Today, for international law, the global commons are the high sea, the seabed, Antarctica, and so on, the leftovers. And everyone understands that the system is common, we cannot divide it, and this is a condominium, okay? Why the condominium is so different from the other solutions? Because condominium is not, I do not learn nothing about condominium in the University of Law. What they teach me on the university is that we have common property and private property as separate things. Because we have these two forms of property on the same place in the condominium, they didn't teach this because this is too much complex. So, for example, in the Spanish doctrine, they call to condominium the complex property because it has no definition. I think that with the systemic approach, we can explain condominium. Condominium is a system where, firstly, we define the common systems, the common parts. And after this functional division, we make a special division. And after, of course, there are overlap between the common property and the private property. And inside my apartment, the system of water, energy, or elevators are common. I have overlap of different legal status on the same place. This is a condominium. This is what we have on the planet in a global scale. We have a system that is common, that is in an overlap way with the sovereignties of states. To manage successfully the system, we do not need to abolish the borders. What we need is another legal abstraction that represents the unity. The borders of states are legal abstractions. We do not divide the sea or the airspace with a legal abstraction. Now we need to create a new legal abstraction that is able to represent the system as a single whole, as it works on the nature, and in this overlap to manage the system without threatening the sovereignty of states. Because we are talking about different things. One thing is the system, another thing is the space where the system operates. And this system should be the object of global governance, the object of governance of United Nations. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paulo, for your interesting presentation and also for making us thinking in an unusual way. So it seems that the way we manage our ecosystems are fundamental in order to find real solutions. So we are now about the same time we were supposed to finish this session, despite the impossibility of Mario Boccucci to finish his presentation. And I would like to confirm what I have anticipated, that the presentation will be recorded and will be available, not now during this afternoon, but when all the other presentations will be also available online. So it means that we will have now a break. I think we had three very much provocative presentations. And once we will have only three participants, three speakers on our round table, I would like to invite you to make questions as much as possible, so we will have enough time for discussion, hopefully. It's not all the times that we have this luxury time availability, so let us make good use of it. And please, you need to use the link. I think the link will be available on the screen to use for chatting and to present your questions. So we will have a break of roughly 30 minutes, and after that we will be back for the second round table of today. So we will discuss some concrete, as much concrete as possible, solutions for a biodiverse and equitable world. Thank you, and see you in a while. Good afternoon. Welcome back again to our round table. So, unfortunately, we cannot count with the contribution with Mario Bocucchi, as we also know. It means that we have the three guests from our panel and all the contributions that you might give to this debate. So I think one of the evidences we've got from not only the afternoon presentations, but during the whole day, is that the post-pandemic world calls for action. And it is very clear. We added a lot of knowledge, as we have seen in the morning, about global biodiversity, about the agenda for the next decade, but there are something that we still need to reflect a lot, and mostly to define how to act. And this action is absolutely crucial to create employment for a sustainable growth and to invert the trajectory of biodiversity loss and climate crisis. So it is quite an evidence for at least all those who are attending today to this conference. And what we would like is to amplify this kind of message to the others who are not with us today. So the European Commission has challenged the European society for a Green Deal, which implies a commitment of governments, either national or locals, to innovate on policy design and to implement strategies capable of reinventing and re-establishing the way people and nature interconnect. So if we want to start a new agenda, a new relationship between people and nature, it's absolutely crucial to have this notion on how to make action. So it seems that this action should be something different than the one we implemented in the past, and it implies also some kind of innovation. So innovation, in whatever sense, implies significant input on creative concepts, models, and solutions to transform the current reality towards an equitable future that might satisfy both the balance of nature and man ambition. So, despite we recognize that nature needs to be recovered, we still need to assume that man will continue to be ambitious. So, I would like to start by maybe one first round of exchanges of ideas. And it is very much about on how to innovate it, because from what I've heard, which was very stimulating in a way to think on the future, but at the same time, I'm afraid that most of the ideas that we are based in, we already know something about them for 10 or 15 years ago. So when we talk about high nature values in relation with farming, I'm quite sure that the European Union established some kind of policy 10, 15 years ago, or even more, a little bit more maybe. When we talk about rewilding, it's something that is not absolutely new. So also the idea on how to managing the world according to a condominium idea was also set up some time ago. So how can we really not only convert all these ideas that we already something know about into action, but at the same time, how can these very inspiring concepts can be innovated in a way to be more effective nowadays? So I'm here because we just realized that gender was not an issue on this panel. So I'm here just to be a little bit more balanced between the three colleagues I have with me. But Paulo, so we start. Thank you.
Hello. See, yeah. I think my proposal is more holistic, so I think we can start by the holistic and after to go to more detail. I think the innovation is really to rethink the concepts of commons. Redefine the commons in the Anthropocene is the title of one article that will be published next month. Is really because we build our society in the classic model of economy where the division is the solution to manage any good, because we think that a common inevitably ends in the tragedy of the commons. Okay, so because each one will try to use the common good in the increased way, and in the end we have the tragedy of commons. And climate change is a tragedy of commons, and also biodiversity loss is a tragedy of commons in the global scale. So, the first time in the history of humankind, we are facing one common good, that we cannot divide it, even if in abstract way. So, to accept something that is common, and when we talk about common, is the system, are the pandemics that depend on the system, that they have no borders, the pandemics has no borders, the system has no borders, the climate has no borders. And we have to accept that this world is not a territory, and we have things, common goods, that although intangible, they exist and support life. And they have the highest value because they support life and our life. And to accept this from a mental point of view, it's the highest challenge we have, I think. When I present this for some years, because the project takes some years, the only barrier that I front, it's never once said this is wrong. The problem is to accept that we have a common good, that is not a territory. We'll build our nationalities fighting against one each other. All the countries were defined the boundaries with many words, and now we are facing something that we cannot divide. We depend on each other. My acts influence the life of everyone in a global scale. We depend on each other, and now we will live in the world that is small. We depend on each other without winners, in a situation where we will be all winners or all losers. This is the great challenge I think we have for the future. Of course, after to achieve agreement to define the common, we must have metrics to define what are the positive impacts, how to pay to compensate the highness, to compensate the restoration of ecosystem. We need this type of thoughts and knowledge we need. But the first step is to accept that my sovereignty can only exist if the common system is in a well-functioned way. This is a very strong sentence or thought of Immanuel Kant when he said, the only way to pursue private interests is on the preservation of common interests. They depend on each other, okay? So when we see this world with the growing of nationalism and so on, this is because the common is not working, and to understand that we depend on each other. I think this is the greatest challenge. The day that we accept this, and to understand that if my neighbor will not have the condition, I will have problems in the future. I depend on my neighbor. I depend on what they are doing in the other side of the planet. This is a mental barrier, okay? Because we have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have the money, and why we are not using the money, the technology, the knowledge to solve this problem? Why? This is a question of mindset, the only problem that we have.
Okay, thank you. Who is now giving a contribution? You, Francisco, please.
Yeah, just to start with a small comment to what Paulo just said. I like the concept, although my own experience is that one of the worst things of one annual cycle in my life is the condominium meeting once every year. So I know how a condominium can be complicated, and most of you all probably knows. So yeah, I think the concept is totally correct. That's how we should see it. I don't know if you consider then that there are different countries with different sizes, and it would work like in the condominium, the biggest guys with the biggest apartments pay a bigger share, and if that would be a function of geographical size or other types of footprint, but these are more details following. But being closer to the next 10 years, coming back to the next decade and to this strategy of the European Union for biodiversity, and thinking about agriculture specifically, I think that there is still a big gap between European citizens and the people that produces and makes the final decisions on policy issues in Brussels. And that's obviously visible in agriculture as well as in other aspects. But for agriculture, there was a big inquiry at European level for European citizens, and the result was very clear. What European citizens want from agriculture is not more food, because at least today there is not a problem of food scarcity in Europe. So what citizens wanted most is environment, quality of food, not the amount of food, quality, environment, biodiversity. And myself as a scientist, with a group of other colleagues from other countries in Europe, we made an overview and a strong criticism on the current agricultural policy. And a group of more than 3,000 scientists signed a letter that was sent to the different commissioners in Europe. The Commissioner of Environment, we had a meeting with the Commissioner of Environment, a meeting with the Commissioner of Agriculture, we had a meeting with Vice President Timmermans, and they were all supportive of our ideas. But in particular, the Commissioner for Agriculture made it very clear that the lobbies that he suffered were very strong, and so the lobbies of the big farmers associations, the lobbies from the industry that produces pesticides and fertilizers, those are the voices affecting the decisions, still affecting the decisions in Brussels. So I don't know if it is a matter of how we vote, when we vote for the parliament, I don't know, but I'm sure the solution I'm sure there is a gap between what the average European citizens wants from the common agricultural policy and what is being decided in Brussels for the next 10 years. And of course, a EU biodiversity strategy has to grab to the European agricultural policy because it is a major driver in the continent that has lots of semi-natural landscapes that were farmed for centuries or millennia. But that's a big problem because my feeling is that the people in the agricultural DG suffer a lot lobby, and so the final decisions are still far from our aim of biodiversity targets and the high nature value farmland. So I think the agricultural policy is key for the next 10 years, and that what we want from the policy, what most of us want from the agricultural policy, is not what will be decided. That's my fear.
Okay, it seems that common agriculture policy is really an issue to tackle a more equitable world. So for this to happen, is the rewilding idea may give a significant contribution for this? So is there any kind of compensation between the concept of restoring nature and the concept of living space for a more equitable world?
Addressing equity, both economic equity and equity in access to resources is one of the fundamental challenges of our societies. It's also not a very novel challenge, to refer to your comment before on what is the novelty of the ideas. Although all these three ideas that we mentioned before, the idea of the biosphere as public goods or biodiversity as public goods is only 30 years old. The idea of high natural value farmland is only around 20 years old, and rewilding was completely an apocryphal idea in Europe until about 8 years ago. So these are not concepts that have been around for, let's say, many decades. And so there is a lot of novelty on some of these concepts. But as equity is an old challenge, sustainability is an old challenge for our society. We have a very complex challenge of a population that has been growing, as Miguel said this morning, adding a million individuals every decade. Right now, a billion, 1,000 million in Portuguese and a billion in English or Anglo-Saxonic language. So a billion every decade, an increase in consumption of natural resources, of energy, for instance, and the environmental impacts are very proportional to the energy that societies consume. Growing economies, and a finite planet. And this is a huge challenge that has been becoming more and more urgent. And of course, equity and how you address equity has to be part of the solution. It cannot be a part of the problem, it has to be transformed in part of the solution. And rewilding, although not targeting necessarily equity, can be included in solutions that target a more equitable distribution of resources. Many of the areas that we are proposing that could go into rewilding are areas that are being abandoned by a variety of reasons, from marginal productivity to lack of access to modern services and health services, education services, so isolation. We can make these areas for better living by, instead of trying to keep them as museums and keeping them as they were in the past. And we have done some research on this, and most people don't want to be kept in a museum. If you ask and interview people and ask what they want to do, they don't want to be in a museum. We have to find solutions that work in today's world. We are, some historians say that we're going to this forced energy regime transition. There was the first transition from Paleolithic, from hunter-gatherers to agricultures. There's the transition from agriculture to industrial revolution. And now we're going in a transition from the industry society to an information society, and also for a greener society. And we have to think about how these landscapes can be managed in ways that are equitable, where people there are not left behind, but that we don't imprison them in how they were living in 200 years ago or 100 years ago. We have to look at how they want to live in the next century. And this requires really thinking outside the box and thinking in novel ways. And that's what many of the initiatives with Rewilding are trying to do, is trying to do it in a different way from what has been done until now, that has been a very static approach of conserving things as they were. And in Rewilding, I think how things could be if you leave a bit more space for nature.
Okay, so I have the idea that the reason for the biodiversity to have some new position on the political agenda is due to this global tragedy, as Paulo said. So we are pressured by, we are scared about what is supposed to happen in the near future regarding not only the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, but also the economic crisis. And in a way, it was this pandemic who was accelerated this sense of scaring. What do you expect to happen if the problem of the pandemic will be solved in 2 or 3 years? So do you think that all these gains, let's say all these achievements that we found possible for this new this new policy agenda, what do you expect to happen if in 3 years' time or so the pandemic will be solved, will be overcame? So do you think that it was just an opportunity, that we once again will just will forget about it? Do you think that we will turn back to the model that we have before the pandemic? How do you think all this effort that we are doing now can be sustained over the next decade? Do you still need some kind of big pressure like a pandemic to act effectively for the environment and for the biodiversity to succeed?
Usually, for a society to move, to change, you need a big pressure, you need a big crisis to change. We only have the Society of Nations after the First World War. We have United Nations because we have the Second World War. And what pandemics could bring for the new century is the feeling that the things that we give value today do not have the value that we give to them. That there are other things like nature, like the work of nature, for example, that should have more value than the commodities that we produce. Okay? Because we start to understand, because we have to live with this, we cannot be friends and make because we depend on this. The feeling of, for me, the most important is to question something that for us before was not questionable. We consider this as granted, and this is not granted. For me, without rethinking the concept of wealth creation, the concept of value, that of course, because it's a common, depends on the also recognition of a common without borders, we will not move, we will not change, because we still acting and organize as we was on the last century. We're talking about new things that implies new thinking, new structural organization, and so on. And when you talk about environment, we talk about these questions of commons, of value, and so on. But we never question these questions, because until today, we consider environment one thing, and after economy another thing, and after the legal approach another thing. And all these things, they live together. The system is only one. The legal framework is connected with what economy considers as value, and what this economy considers as value should have as basic information how the nature works, what is value for the nature, that is also value for the life. No one can conceive a world that we have all the commodities, we have access internet, we have iPads, iPhones, and so on, and the most basic conditions for life does not exist. And this problem will pose questions about the concept of what matters, what really matters. And for me, the pandemics and the environmental crisis are the big opportunity to make one civilizational evolution, as we made with the First World War, the Second World War. The motive for a third evolution is this one. The great question is, are we able to do it or not? Okay, because this is not a war. This is more complex than a war like the Second World War. For me, is to see if we make the conceptual evolution that is needed to address this in a collective way as a global organized society. This is the question that pandemics and climate crisis pose to us in this time.
Yes, I would expect you responding in this way, because of course you are the ones who think more or less the same way to many of us here today. What I would like also to make some reflection is what we expect about the rest of the society, about the society who is not aware of the same problems and the gravity of the problems that we know about. So this is where my concern is, because 30 years ago it was absolutely clear that many actors, world decision makers, big companies, 30 years ago or even more, they were already aware of these exactly the same concerns. But during 30 years, it seems that we didn't act enough. So my question is not about our own opinion as people who are very much within this kind of thinking and either more academic or more practice, but we know we are talking about a big problem, and we need to afford this problem with a big action. My concern is about the rest of the society. So if we can give some contribution on how do you expect the rest of the society to react on this call for action. It would be not only important for us, but for those who are hearing us. So, Enrique, would you like to say something about that?
I think there has been a huge progress in the last 30 years also in improving environmental conditions in many places. When I was a kid, I used to sometimes go across the farms in Guimarães, and I remember vividly that the river would be a different color each day depending what color they were coloring the textiles that day in the factory. If you go to the same river today, it's a clean water river. And this is just one story of many stories where there has been huge progress towards better environment. I showed you in the example in Leipzig. I remember when I did my when I was welcomed at the University of Halle by the rector. He told me that he had gone in the 80s to Leipzig and for his PhD research, and for 10 days he couldn't leave the hotel room because he couldn't see more than 5 meters because of the cold. This is, if you go to this area today, is one of, in terms of air quality and environmental standards, is huge progress. So when society decides to take action, and it does it based on the best available science, huge progress can be made. What is the lesson from the pandemic? What can we do from the pandemic? First, I think the pandemic is a disaster. I'm not happy at all that we reduce the climate emission, the greenhouse gas emissions because of the pandemic. I think this is a disaster. The pandemic is a disaster. There's been over 1 million deaths that we know, and we are still in the beginning. But as any disaster, what can we learn from it? Yeah? And in reality, I think we are learning some things, and that I hope that we will hold to them. It's not that there is the challenge that everything can go back as it was before, but I think there are some things that we'll learn. For instance, that when we give more space to nature, nature comes back. This has been seen in many places around the world where you have wildlife coming back because people were less present or there was less cars in the streets. And so I think people will think about how could our society, our world be different if we had a bit more space for nature? Can we do less travel for meetings using technologies like video conference? I think some of that will stay. I think we are now much more used to do video conference, and that will have a positive impact. Why to go for a meeting of an hour and travel hundreds of kilometers if you can do it efficiently by video conference? I think there will be a genuine change there. Other things may be harder. Some part of the suppression, for instance, in global travel, has been by impacting tourism. Will people stop going to faraway places now after the pandemic? I have doubts about that. Yeah. So I think there are some things that we can learn and improve, but other things will return to how they were before.
Yes, please, Francisco.
Two very short comments. I think two of the consequences of the pandemic was, number one, the value of biodiversity has increased a lot. And in a city, the value of urban green areas in cities, I believe, has been strongly improved, and probably, I guess, the price of housing in the near future will more strongly reflect the location in relation to urban green areas. And so that's my first one. Second one, I think the pandemics raised even more the concern what people assume as food security, which I think it's more food sovereignty, but that doesn't matter. So the concept, the idea of if there is a Armageddon coming, I can drive 40 kilometers to buy potatoes and cabbage, or I know this guy that can bring them directly in a small circuit chain rather than relying on big supermarkets. It's something that also raised people's awareness of the value of high nature value farmland and farmland near cities in peri-urban areas. And so I think for the people living in the city, the valuation of biodiversity is a result of the pandemics.
Okay, it seems that our audience is not very much participating on asking questions or giving comments. So I would like to invite you again to do so, because we still have some time. But meanwhile, there is another aspect that I feel curious about your opinion, which is the speed of this necessary transformation. So in some cases, I think that we need to respond very urgently, because the time is very short comparing to the threat that we and biodiversity are facing. But on the other hand, I think we in some other aspects, we need to slow down a bit and to give enough time to our own to think properly and to experiment and to have a kind of retroactive cycle, so we can confirm which are the solutions that may best fit on our needs. So shall we speed up, or we better slow down concerning this necessary transformation? What do you foresee for its option? So what can be happening if we are just trying to solve the problems as urgently as possible, with all the consequences and impacts that we can have as a consequence, or which kind of other solutions, and also if we think how the complexity of the society dealing with these factors, environmental dimension, biodiversity, economy, equity. So this is too much for us in a very short time. So in a way, we are trying to give answer as soon as possible, but maybe what was needed in former times was enough time to think and to act in a responsible way. So what do you think about this speeding the transformation, speeding up or slowing down, and which kind of situations can be more like the one or the others? Would you like to start now, Francisco, because we are...
No, I don't talk too much, so I will be quick. My take is, let's be as quick as possible. I think that we have a decreasing population. We should have people leaving cities and going inland. And for doing that, I want internet. I want good accessibility. I want, of course, water supply. I want schools for my kids. So there is a whole need, unless we have an empty territory with most of the people in big cities. I think many people are willing to go back to places where they can produce food, where they have good quality, good water quality, good quality air, not hair, which I don't have. So I think fostering technical innovation, I don't mind going back to the mountains, but I don't want to be a shepherd. I want to have a drone. I want to have mechanical sheep. I don't want to have animals. So technological innovation is key to help this transition to support farmland that can be high nature value and multifunctionality, but does not have to be the old way. So, yes, I would speed up.
Okay. Do you slow down something, or you are on the speeding wave?
Let me, I like very much one intervention of Miguel Araújo when he said, we have the goals to stop the loss of biodiversity into 2010, we didn't achieve, 2020 we didn't achieve. What is the reason to believe that we will achieve in 2030? This is a big question. And I like very much how we can talk about this without being conscious, to have the awareness that we have 25 years of negotiations without results. We are not beginning now. Okay? So, why we do not achieve different results? Why we are expecting to have different results if we continue to do the same thing? The question is, are we able to do the paradigm shift that implies a change on the structural problem or not? What makes us to believe that in COP26 next year in November, they will have different results? If, when they go to the negotiations, what is going to there is the same that they take on COP25. Okay? This is, sorry, but this is my question, because we have to question things that until now were somehow unquestionable. The concept of value, the question of common, and so on. Okay? Without make these questions that are difficult questions, we will not change the way with some incremental improvements, or the incremental improvements in some sectors will make little improvements, but in the end of the game, the result will be the same. This is the question that we have to make now, because probably we have only 10 years to change. And we are discussing these questions for more than 30 years. Okay? And this implies uncertainties. And this is a society of Excel that wants the future controlled by 10 years, 20 years, what will happen in 10 years or 20 years from now. They want a solution, a closed solution with all the problems solved in Excel. This is not true. This will not happen. Okay? This is an ongoing process, and the question is to accept real changes. Changes not in the technical solutions. The technical solutions could help, but we have to change the rules of the game. This is how I see the things.
And our minds, for sure. So I don't know if Eric would like to add something on this aspect, because we have now a question from the audience.
I think we, as Francisco mentioned, we should be as quick as possible, but I also want to caution about too fast transitions and thinking we have the solution. History, and I think history is really important for us to understand how to move forward. History of society, and particularly of the 20th century, is full of movements that thought they had the solution for the society. And they were well informed, either by economics or by eugenics or by other fields of knowledge. And they had the solution, and they went ahead and sometimes oppressed hundreds of millions of people for many decades. I don't think we want to go there. Science is not a religion. Scientists are not priests. We can provide evidence for decisions to be made, but it's a political process, a democratic, important democratic process that then leads us to those solutions. I had the honor to lead a new generation of scenarios for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiverse Ecosystem Services. And we do kind of these experiments in some way of what people want to do. And Francisco told us that he would like to go to the mountains. I love the mountains, yeah? But is this universal? So we asked this question, do everybody wants the same future for nature, for instance? And we started developing this thing called nature futures, this new generation of scenarios into futures. And we found that there are three main axes where people place themselves. People that want nature for nature, and rewilded nature, for instance, is the kind of nature that people want. People that see nature as something you can have an utilitarian use, nature for society. We call this nature for society, where you use nature for carbon sequestration or for water purification and so on. And then there is nature as culture, people that, nature is part of people and people are part of nature, and we want to maintain the cultural landscapes and so on. All these three types of visions for the future, none of them is superior to the other. All of them coexist, all of them are positive. And it has to be a democratic process to find the balance of how much of this positive you want to go in each place, how much you want to go in one direction, or nature for nature, or how much you want to go nature as culture. And what we have to strengthen is the democratic process to do that, to avoid exactly that this becomes such a crisis that we have some kind of unstructured revolution that may be dangerous. So we have to strengthen the democracy institutions nationally, locally, globally to address these issues with the best science available, but not subvert democracy.
Thank you. So we have now 10 minutes before ending this round table, and we have two questions. So one, it was by David Avelar, and he asks, how do you see the potential role of community-supported agriculture as a solution to the problems we are facing? And the second question is by Carlos Teixeira. Maybe we can combine both. The question is, thinking specifically about Portugal, if you could choose one immediate measure that the government could or should implement next year, favoring biodiversity, which measure would you choose? So, first question, how do you see the potential role of community-supported agriculture as a solution to the problems we are facing? It seems that you may answer.
No, I'm not an agriculture expert, but so to reply to the question, it would be good to clarify what do you assume as a community-based agriculture. I can try to, if the idea is this concept of what some call food sovereignty. So it's people focus. So it is not having policymakers or governments deciding what how to organize and what to produce, but leaving that action to citizens at local or regional scales. I don't have if that is the case, I don't have a clear opinion about it. I think it's one of the ways of, in particular, in the scenario of potential collapse, if we reach that scenario, it could be a way of organization that could be reassuring for people. I guess it's one of the plausible scenarios, one of the most negative scenarios, if by chance we need to adopt that scenario. But I think it can be a good alternative. My main concern is that for these people to be supported, there is a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of policy barriers. Because, for example, many of the people that are willing to participate in experiments, agricultural experiments, including other colleagues, they are not even eligible as farmers, so they cannot have access to farming subsidies from the Commission. So I think that's one of the problems. I think, I don't remember, but maybe 1/3 of the farmers in high nature value farmland are not eligible as farmers. So they are not recognized as farmers by the European Union for the purposes of being eligible for getting subsidies. Note that agricultural subsidies are only part of the solution. They are a very important part, but other things like technological development and knowledge transfer, education are also very important. So I don't have a clear view on this community level organization of a food production system, but that's it's as most things in life, I see pros and cons on it.
Okay, so we have now almost 5 minutes, and I think it would be nice to have some reflection on what is going on in Portugal. So the second question was exactly if we could define a priority for an immediate measure for the government to implement next year. What could it be? Do you have any kind of a recipe for the prior measure to be effective in the country?
For example, to start the process of giving value to the work of nature, there are already one project about the payment of ecosystems in Portugal. It's a pilot project. But this payment could have different solutions. And one of them that is easy to start is some system of tax credits for the owners of ecosystems that now only have obligations. Someone that has a territory inside a natural park only have obligations, does not have compensations by the rest of society for the services that is providing to society inside the natural park, for example. Okay, this is a system of penalties. To be owner of a territory inside a natural park is a mess in this moment. You have no advantage on this. For example, to have a system of tax credits or to receiving ecosystem payments to start the process of giving value to the nature, to the orchestra, will not emerge from one day to the other. It will be a process, an ongoing process. And to start this in the next national budget with the payment in a large scale of at least tax credits for the owners of territories that are providing ecosystem services.
Okay, so remunerating the landowners or the land managers, or okay, so yes, Yes, now Enrique, please. What would be your big proposal?
I mentioned this afternoon that the European Union strategy, biodiversity strategy for 2030 has a very ambitious objective. That is to have 10% of area of land and sea strictly protected in Europe. In Portugal, that area is well below 1% in the land and close to 0% in the coast or the ocean. I think we have here a huge challenge ahead on how we're going to do this, and it's better that we start moving forward on that and get a dialogue with all the stakeholders and how can we do that, what kind of what places, in how, what ways, what kind of benefits we can get, what kind of payments for ecosystem services we can implement, and so on. It's a big challenge, and looking forward to the next 10 years in this challenge in Europe.
Thank you. So, the last proposal for you.
Yeah, coming back to the agricultural sector, my proposal would be change what you eat and select carefully at the supermarket, and that's the beginning of a big change. You may know that global food production is enough, but what is produced, 1/3 is wasted, and 1/3 we use to feed other animals. And of what is wasted in developing countries, in developed countries, 40% of what is wasted occurs at retail and consumer level. So I think as individuals, we have still a long way to go in terms of how do we buy and what we eat.
Okay, so I think we will finish now. Thank you a lot. It was a great pleasure to have you in this round table, and I'm quite sure that all your contributions were very useful for everyone who is listening this session. I think also that many solutions came up, many other possibilities to be developed further in other contexts, in other days. But I think just before ending, I would like to say that we are not able to define solutions in an isolated way. So we absolutely need to work together more and more, and to assume this idea of deciding or decision making, and which also implies co-management if we really want to go towards an equitable world. So I think it was very clear during the day that this interdisciplinarity within the biodiversity topic is really big, and we only can afford if we can combine it in a co-management process. So, once again, thank you a lot, and we will keep on discussing these and other topics during the week, the Green Week in Lisbon. Thank you.